The vote was already decided before the humans spoke a single word. Everyone in the chamber knew it. The 12 raised platforms of the Grand Accord Council floated in silence above the pulsar core, their light shifting from blue to amber as the session opened. The human delegation had traveled 41 days to reach this place. They had prepared for 9 months before that. They stood now in the center of the floor, 4 people from a small world that most of the council had never personally visited, making a case that the oldest civilizations in the known galaxy had already decided to ignore. Ambassador Deval Reed spoke clearly and without fear. He named every reason Earth deserved a seat at the table: a unified planetary government, voluntary disarmament of nuclear stockpiles, early faster-than-light travel, a formal request for protection against the Vreth expanse, a hostile empire pressing in from the outer dark, already testing human colony worlds at the edge of map space. The Varath representative, a tall creature that resembled cracked glass given a spine and a voice, interrupted twice. It called human history a record of repeated self-destruction. It said that a species that had spent 10,000 years fighting itself had no right to ask others to fight for it. The Sulani representative said nothing. It simply pulsed, which the translation units rendered as extended skepticism. High Arbiter Dross called the vote. 9 against, 2 abstaining, 1 in favor. Councillor Yeth of the Marathi, a quiet species that most of the other 11 found too soft to take seriously, cast the only voice that said yes. Reed accepted the result with a straight back and a flat expression. He thanked the council for its time. Then he led his delegation out of the chamber without looking back. But the young officer behind him did look back. Her name was Nora Vassell. She was 32 years old, she carried no title that mattered in that room, and she had been brought along to manage logistics and translation support. She had no vote, no seat, no standing. But she stood at the back of that delegation, and she looked at every face on every platform. The cracked glass Varath, the Poolsing Sulani, the 12 chairs of 12 species who had just decided that humanity was not worth the trouble. She looked at Dross last. He had already moved on to the next item on the agenda. She memorized his face anyway. Outside the chamber, the human delegation boarded their transit pod in silence. Reed sat with his hands folded. His aides stared at the floor. No one spoke until they were well clear of the station and moving through open space. It was Nora who finally said something, and what she said was not angry. It was not sad, she said. They didn't even read the full brief. Reed looked at her. No, he said, they did not. They dismissed us in 4 hours, she said. We traveled 41 days. Yes. She turned back to the viewport. Outside, the pulsar blinked its slow and indifferent rhythm. Then we won't ask again, she said. Reed did not argue with her. Maybe he agreed. Maybe he was just too tired, but he did not argue. Back on Earth, in a government building that most people didn't know existed, a man named Osai Manu watched the session recording from start to finish without pausing once. He was the head of the Interstellar Expansion Bureau, which was a department that had always had a larger budget than its official function required. He had spent 3 years preparing the petition alongside Reed. He had written large parts of it himself. When the recording ended, he sat in silence for a moment. Then he turned to his aide and said, "Remove the petition archive from public record. Mark it internal only." His aide blinked. "Are we going to try again?" Manu picked up his tea and looked at the window. The sky outside was ordinary and blue and full of clouds that had nothing to do with politics. "No," he said, "we are not going to try again. We are done asking." He took a slow sip. "Get me the construction teams, all of them, and tell them the timetable has changed." "Changed to what?" He set the cup down, immediately. Nobody outside that building knew what that meant yet. The council certainly did not know. They were already on to the next agenda item, the next species, the next small problem from the outer regions. Earth was filed away under a heading that roughly translated as, "Revisit in 5 centuries, conditions permitting." They did not think about the young officer who had looked back from the door. They did not think about the bureau chief who had just changed a timetable. They did not think about Earth at all. That was, as it turned out, the single greatest mistake any civilization in the known galaxy had ever made. The first thing Osai Manu did was pull Earth off the map. Not literally. The planet was still there, the cities still ran, the people still went about their lives without knowing anything had changed. But in every diplomatic registry, every trade route listing, every interstellar frequency log, Earth's signals went quiet. Ambassadors were recalled. Relay buoys in Council-adjacent space were deactivated one by one over the course of 8 months, slowly enough that no one monitoring the network would notice a pattern. When the Vareth Trade Office sent a routine inquiry about Earth's updated contact frequencies, they received a standard automated reply that the Bureau of External Communications was undergoing a restructuring. Then nothing after that. The Vareth filed it and forgot about it. So did everyone else. This was exactly what Manu had planned. He called the program Project Aegis. On paper, it was an expansion of Earth's Deep Space Survey initiative. In practice, it was the largest military construction project in human history, run entirely off the books, spread across 11 orbital facilities and 3 asteroid belt stations that had been quietly reclassified as private manufacturing hubs. The ships being built were not survey vessels. 8 years after the dismissal, Nora Vassell was a senior commander with a clear record and a reputation for being the sort of officer who finished what she started. Manu gave her a different kind of assignment. He did not send her to fight. He sent her to listen. There were species out in the unmapped regions that the Council had walked past for centuries. Not dangerous species, not powerful ones. Just small, struggling civilizations that had applied for Accord membership and been quietly shelved, or had once been promised Council protection, and then watched that promise dissolve when something more important came up. Nora visited them one by one in a small ship with a crew of 12. She brought no soldiers. She brought engineers, doctors, and a linguist named Petra who could crack a basic grammar structure in 4 days flat. The first contact was with Riven's people, the Sulhari, who lived on 3 moons around a gas giant that the Council had classified as a navigational hazard and never revisited. They were builders by nature. Their hands had 6 fingers and moved with a precision that made human engineers quietly jealous. They had been trying to develop FTL travel for 200 years and had gotten 3/4 of the way there before a materials problem stopped them cold. Nora's engineers recognized the problem in 40 minutes. It was a cooling issue, fixable. Riven, who was the Sulhari's head of ship design, watched the human team work without saying anything for 2 full days. On the 3rd day, he walked over to their table and set down a data slate showing a structural lattice that no human had ever seen before. It was a method for weaving 2 exotic metals together at the molecular level, in a way that produced a hull material stronger than anything Earth's shipyards were currently using. Trade, he said. His translator was basic but functional. Your cooling solution, my lattice. Nora looked at the slate for a long moment. Then she looked at him. That is not a fair trade, she said. Your lattice is worth 10 times what we just showed you. Riven tilted his head. Among his people, this meant something close to surprise. You are telling me you are getting the better deal. Yes. Most visitors do not say that. Most visitors, Nora said, are not trying to make a friend. That was the beginning of something that neither of them had a name for yet. Over the next 4 years, as Nora worked her way through 6 other forgotten or abandoned species, Riven traveled with her. He was blunt in the way that Sulhari tended to be, direct to the point of what humans sometimes found uncomfortable, and he had a dry way of describing disasters that made Petra laugh until she cried. He also redesigned the hull of every ship Earth was building. The Vreth problem did not wait for anyone to be ready. In the 12th year after the dismissal, 3 outer human colonies were hit in the same week. Not destroyed, probed. Vreth scouts, fast and silent, moving through the dark between stars with a confidence that said they had been planning this for a long time. Earth's new fleet, not yet finished, not yet named, engaged them for the first time at a colony called Reach Station. The battle lasted 6 hours. Humanity won, but it cost 2 ships and 119 lives, and what the commanders learned that day was written into every training program that followed. The Vreth were not reckless. They were patient. They had been watching human space for years, and they had chosen their moment carefully. Counselor Yeth sent Manu a private message shortly after. It was brief. It said only, "The Council has noticed your silence. There is debate about what it means. I would tell you to be careful, but I think you already are." Manu read it twice, then he wrote back 3 words. "Not much longer." He meant it. In the shipyards, the first Cornerstone-class dreadnought was 3 months from completion. The hull was Riven's lattice. The engines were human. The weapons systems were a collaboration between 4 different species who had spent the last decade learning to trust each other for no other reason than that Nora had shown up on their doorstep without an agenda and stayed until the work was done. The ship did not have a name yet. Nora would name it herself when she saw it. She stood at the viewport of the station as the hull took its final shape in the dark, and she did not think about the council chamber or the vote or the Vareth's cold glass face. She thought about what came next. The Vreth did not announce their offensive. They simply began it. 3 council border worlds received distress signals within 6 hours of each other. The signals were short because the stations sending them did not survive long enough to say much. By the time the council convened an emergency session, the Vreth had already pushed 40 light-years past the established boundary line, and were moving with a speed and coordination that the Accord's ancient fleet doctrine had no answer for. The Council's warships were impressive to look at. Large, decorated, fitted with weapons that had not been meaningfully upgraded in 2 centuries, because there had been no war serious enough to require it. They moved in formations designed for a different era, following rules of engagement written by species who had not fought anything genuinely dangerous in so long that the manuals had become more ceremonial than practical. The Vreth ignored the formations and went straight for the logistics lines. Within 2 weeks, 4 council fleets had been destroyed or forced back. High Arbiter Dross ordered a full military session, the first in 112 years. The chamber that had dismissed Earth in 4 hours now sat in stunned silence, watching tactical feeds that none of them had the language to process. The Vreth were not mindless. Their ships were organic-mechanical, grown as much as built, capable of sealing hull damage mid-battle by drawing on biological reserves the way a living body closes a wound. Their command structure was distributed. No single flagship to destroy, no single admiral to outmaneuver. They moved like a system, every part aware of every other. A Marathi analyst who had studied the Vreth for 15 years without anyone paying much attention stood before the chamber and explained that the Vreth were not attacking out of cruelty. Their home region was dying. 3 star systems running low on resources. A population shrinking for generations. A doctrine that framed expansion as survival. The chamber debated for 2 hours about how to formally condemn Vreth aggression, which was not what the analyst had been suggesting at all. In that same session, someone raised the question of Earth. A junior aide from the Keyleth delegation had noticed something odd while reviewing old records. Earth's diplomatic frequencies had been silent for years, not inactive, silent. There was a difference. Inactive meant they had stopped transmitting. Silent meant they had deliberately stopped responding. Dross asked for the current Earth ambassador's contact record. There was no current ambassador. There had not been one in 14 years. He asked for the last known location of Earth's survey fleet. The records showed it had been reclassified and the public logs had gone dark over a decade ago. He sent a diplomatic vessel to the last known coordinates of Earth's outer relay. The crew expected to find nothing, or perhaps a small station on an old frequency. They had been told this was a courtesy visit to remind a quiet civilization that the galaxy still existed. What they found was a border. Not a wall. A grid of monitoring stations, perfectly spaced and clearly maintained, and behind them a patrol formation of 12 ships that nothing in the Council database matched. Sleek and angular, military, with hulls that absorbed sensor pings in a way that said the material itself was designed to be unreadable. Alongside one of them flew a smaller vessel carrying a flag no one on board had ever seen. A hail came through before the commander could decide what to do. The voice was human, calm and professional, carrying the tone of someone who had done this before and was not going to be rushed. "This is Commander Dara Kalb of the Independent Earth Federation Patrol Wing. You are approaching a monitored boundary. Identify your vessel, your origin, and your purpose." The Council commander stared at her screen. Independent Earth Federation. She searched every database she had. Nothing. No registration, no treaty record, no entry at all. She identified her ship and said she carried a message from High Arbiter Dross. "Stand by," Dara said. The Council vessel waited 40 minutes. The 12 ships did not move. They did not power weapons. They simply sat there, patient and quiet, which was somehow more unsettling than aggression would have been. When the reply came, it was a different voice. Older, carrying the stillness of someone who had made a very large number of decisions over a very long time. "This is Admiral Nora Vassil. Send your message through the standard relay. We will respond in our own time." A brief pause. "Welcome to IEF space." The commander looked at her crew. They looked back at her. She filed her report to Dross with one line of personal annotation at the bottom that was not strictly professional, but that she felt the situation required. It read, "They built a country. IEF Joint Council did not vote immediately." They sat with the question for 3 days. Not because they were unsure of what to do, but because Manu had always believed that decisions made in haste carried the shape of the haste in them forever. And this was not a decision that should carry any shape other than its own clear intent. On the 4th day the vote was held. 11 member species, 16 representatives total. The result was 13 in favor, 2 abstaining, none against. They would go, but they would go on their terms under their flag as a power that was asked and chose to answer, not as a rescue service that came when called. Manu did not attend the departure. He was old now, and the cold of the orbital dock was hard on him, and he had made his peace with the idea that the part of the story he had written was already written. He watched through a screen in his office as the IEF First Combined Fleet assembled above Earth for the first time as a single formation. 340 ships, 11 species, every hull flying the IEF banner alongside its own. The Solhari lattice hulls gleamed differently from the rest, a faint iridescence that no other material produced. The Kelhari corvettes were narrow and fast, built for the sharp end of any engagement. The 3 Marathi support vessels were enormous and quiet, carrying enough medical and engineering capacity to rebuild a city from nothing. And at the front of the formation, the IEFS Steadfast, the flagship, the first cornerstone-class dreadnought ever completed. Nora's ship. Its hull was the color of deep water, and it moved through space with a steadiness that matched its name exactly. The journey to Council space took 9 days. When the fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Grand Accord Station's approach corridor, every observation deck on the station filled within minutes. The Council had been informed that a delegation was coming. They had not been told the size of it. Dross stood at the main observation window and watched the fleet settle into a holding formation with a precision that he found quietly distressing. These were not ships thrown together in a panic. Every movement was coordinated. Every interval was exact. This was a fleet that had trained together for years, possibly for decades, and it showed in the way they moved as one body rather than as a collection of individuals. He had expected humans. He had not expected this. The formal session was called for the following morning. Nora arrived at the council chamber in her dress uniform with Riven beside her and Dara 2 steps behind. They walked in without ceremony, without an escort, without the nervous energy that had marked every previous species that had entered this room wanting something. The chamber was full. Every seat on every platform was occupied. Species that rarely attended in person had sent physical representatives for the first time in years. The Varath platform was crowded. Even the Sulani had produced a visible form, which they rarely bothered with. Nora stood in the center of the floor, exactly where Ambassador Reed had stood 20 years before, and she looked up at the ring of platforms and said nothing for a moment. Not because she was gathering herself. She was already gathered. She was simply looking, the same way she had looked on the way out of this room the last time she was in it, taking note of every face. Then she spoke. She did not accuse. She did not perform anger or satisfaction or triumph. She laid out the IEF's position the way an engineer explains a load-bearing structure, clearly, factually, without decoration. The IEF would engage the Vreth offensive and defend Council border worlds. The IEF had the fleet capability and the tactical understanding to do what the Council's forces had so far been unable to do. This was not an offer made out of charity. It was a proposal between 2 separate powers, and it came with terms. The Council would formally recognize the independent Earth Federation and all its member signatories as sovereign entities. The Council would acknowledge that the species currently allied with the IEF had the right to that alliance without Council interference. And the Council would formally and permanently remove from its record the dismissal of Earth's original petition, replacing it with a statement of mutual recognition. She stopped there. The Varath representative leaned forward. Its glass-like face caught the light in fragments. It began to say something about the process of formal recognition requiring extended review periods, about procedural timelines, about the complexity of restructuring existing treaties. Riven stepped forward. He set a data slate flat on the council floor between him and the Varath platform. He did not explain what was on it. He looked up at the Varath representative with the calm expression of someone who had spent 20 years building things and had no patience left for people who talked about process when the building was already done. The Varath looked down at the slate. Its translator processed the contents. The objection did not continue. Dross had said nothing through all of this. Now he spoke. His voice was quieter than Nora remembered from 20 years ago, and slower, carrying the weight of someone who had lived long enough to understand certain things about being wrong. "You came back," he said. Nora looked at him directly. "We never left," she said. "You just stopped paying attention." Dross held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the slow and deliberate nod of a being making a decision it had been building toward for longer than it wanted to admit. He called for the vote. Nobody handed the IEF the command. They took it politely, in the way that competence tends to take things from incompetence, which is by simply doing the job better until the question of who is in charge answers itself. The Council's border fleet commanders had been fighting the Vreth for 6 weeks by the time the IEF arrived. They were exhausted, badly resupplied, operating on doctrines that kept failing in ways their training had not prepared them for. When Nora's fleet formed up beside them, there was a moment of silence across all channels that had something complicated in it. Relief, and embarrassment, and an unhappy awareness that things had gotten bad enough to require this. Nora did not comment on any of that. She opened a joint command channel, introduced herself, asked the senior council commander for a full tactical picture, and listened without interrupting while the commander spent 20 minutes explaining everything that had gone wrong. Then she said, "Thank you, I have 3 questions." The questions were specific: supply chain junction points, Vreth response times to flanking movements, whether the Council fleet had data on the Vreth's biological repair stations, the ones that fed organic material back to damaged ships. The Council commander blinked. Most visiting commanders opened with their own plan. "We have partial data on the repair stations," she said. "We did not think they were important targets." "They are the only important targets," Nora said. "Send me what you have." The Vreth's great advantage was that their ships healed. A hull breach that would force any other warship to withdraw barely slowed a Vreth vessel. Their repair systems sealed moderate damage in under an hour using organic reserves stored in depot ships that traveled well behind every formation. Nobody had gone after the depots. Council doctrine said you engaged the front line. Nora sent Dara's strike wing after the depots instead. Dara commanded 9 corvettes, 5 Kalhari and 4 human, crewed by mixed teams who had trained together for 4 years, and built a working shorthand that bypassed translation delays almost entirely. They came in from below the formation's travel plane, a direction the Vreth did not monitor heavily because nothing had ever come from there before. They hit 4 depot ships in 11 minutes and were clear before the Vreth response wings oriented. The effect showed within 2 hours. Damaged Vreth ships began withdrawing instead of healing in place. The formation tightened to protect its remaining repair capacity, and a formation that tightens is one that has stopped advancing. The cornerstones moved up. 3 dreadnoughts in a wedge with Council heavy cruisers on the flanks. The Sulhari lattice hull distributed damage across the entire surface in a way that made targeting weak points almost impossible, driving Vreth gunners into firing patterns Nora had predicted and placed her counter-battery units to punish. The battle lasted 9 hours. At the 7th hour, the Vreth lead command ship opened a channel to the IEF flagship, not to the Council fleet, specifically to the IEF. The voice was measuring, like a mind taking readings of something it had not accounted for. "You fight differently," the Vreth commander said. "You do not fight to destroy, you fight to deny." "Yes," Nora said. "Why?" "Because I already know I can destroy you," she said. "I do not need to prove it. What I want is to find out if we can stop doing this." The channel went quiet. Nora waited. She had always been good at waiting. "You know why we push outward," the Vreth commander said. "Yes, your home systems are failing. You need resources. Your doctrine says expansion is survival." She paused. "We have read your history. We understand the logic even if we cannot accept the method." Silence again. "What do you propose?" "A ceasefire. 72 hours. Enough time for people with more authority than either of us to get in the same room. We will bring geological data on 3 resource-viable systems in open space that belong to no one. We will bring engineers." She let that land. "We have good engineers." The channel closed. The Council observers watching the feed did not speak. The Vareth representative was motionless. The Marathi analyst who had been ignored for 15 years looked at the screen and permitted herself the smallest possible smile. 61 minutes later, the Vreth fleet broadcast on all channels. "Ceasefire accepted, pending negotiation." Dara opened a private channel from her corvette. "Did you just end a war from a bridge?" "We ended it from a depot ship," Nora said. "We just announced it from a bridge." Dara considered this. "That is going in the log," she said. 3 months after the ceasefire, the Grand Accord station looked different. Not in its structure. The platforms still floated in their old ring above the pulsar core, but the corridors were different. IEF staff moved through them alongside Council aides. Sulhari engineers were refitting 3 docking bays with updated coupling systems. A pair of Kelhari junior diplomats were arguing cheerfully with a Vareth trade official about cargo classifications, and the argument had the comfortable rhythm of people who expected to reach agreement and were enjoying the process. The formal signing session was scheduled for midday. It was not a surrender, it was a restructuring. The Grand Accord Council would become the Galactic Accord Assembly. With a new charter that recognized the IEF as a co-founding bloc with equal standing, every IEF member species would carry full protective status. The original record of Earth's dismissal would be expunged and replaced with a joint statement of mutual recognition. Councillor Yeth, who had cast the one yes vote 20 years ago and spent 2 decades being mostly ignored for it, was asked to read the opening of the charter aloud. She did so with the careful dignity of someone trying hard not to show how much a moment means to them. Before the session, Dross found Nora in a side corridor off the main chamber. He had come without aids, without formal robes. He looked like what he was, a very old being at the end of a long tenure trying to figure out what remained. "You could have come back angry," he said. "Yes," she said. "You could have made this a punishment." "Yes." He was quiet. "I believed we were maintaining an order," he said, "that the existing structure was stable and that adding an unstable element would break things that could not be rebuilt." "The order you were maintaining had already stopped working," Nora said. "The Vreth were proof. Species were falling out of council space for lack of support and you were filing the reports." She paused. "We did not come back to break your structure. We came back because we built a better one, and eventually someone was going to need it." Dross absorbed this. "You are more patient than I expected," he said. "We had 20 years," she said. "Patience was the easy part." She walked into the chamber. Manu watched the signing ceremony from Earth on a screen in his small house near the bay. He had never gotten around to leaving. Riven was with him. Riven had arrived 3 years ago for a 6-month engineering consultation and had simply not gone back, which Manu had come to think of as a very Sulhari way of choosing to live somewhere. They watched in silence until the charter signatures were complete. "You should feel more satisfied than you look," Riven said. Manu looked at the screen. The chamber was full. Species that 20 years ago had never shared a room were seated beside each other, some talking, some watching others with the cautious curiosity of people still deciding what they thought. "I feel exactly as satisfied as I look," Manu said. "Which is?" "Finished, not sadly. The way a builder says it when the last beam is in and the structure stands. This part is finished. What comes next belongs to them." He nodded at the screen, at Nora, at Dara making a dry remark to the Marathi analyst that clearly landed well, at a Sulhari engineer explaining something to a Vareth representative who was, for the first time, showing the posture of someone genuinely listening. Riven said, "When my people first met yours, we thought you were reckless. You moved too fast, committed before you calculated, gave things away before value was established." "I remember," Manu said. "You told Nora directly." She agreed with me. Then she said what we were reading as recklessness was something else. She said your species measures value by the relationship, not the transaction. Manu smiled at the screen. She was right. "Yes," Riven said, "she was." The session ended. The new charter was sealed and distributed to every registered civilization in known space. On 12 worlds that had spent years outside any protection, the message arrived and was read. In different languages and with different customs, the reaction was in most cases some version of the same thing, cautious belief that maybe something had shifted toward better. The IEFS Steadfast departed 4 days later on a deep space survey of a region no Accord species had ever charted. Humans, Sulhari, Kelhari, 2 Marathi. And in a bunk on the lower deck, fitted with temperature and pressure no standard human would find comfortable, a single Vreth observer slept in the motionless way of his people. He was heading into the unknown, alongside the species that had offered him a seat on the ship rather than a line in a report. He had not expected that. None of them had expected any of this. That was, when everything was counted and considered, perhaps the most human thing about all of it.